Hello, good afternoon, and thanks to everyone for coming. It's my pleasure to introduce this session, which is where Diana Mazgutova is going to be talking about L2 learners' perceptions of writing strategies. So the format basically will be that Diana will talk for about 25 minutes, and then there'll be three discussants. That's Chu-Yun Liu, Simon Green, and myself, and we will try and keep ourselves to about 5 minutes, and then it will be open to questions.
Okay, hello once again, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present at today's CLER Conversation Series meeting. I would like to talk about the project, or actually part of the project, or one of the components of it, which I conducted as part of my PhD research a few years ago. But this project was mainly using the mixed methods approach. I collected both the quantitative and the qualitative data. But the qualitative data, which I collected as part of my PhD research, me and my colleague at the School of Education and my co-author, Judith Hanks, has analyzed together with me, and we submitted it to the Journal of Academic Writing, which is at the moment going through the second round of review. And I wanted just to share the findings of this qualitative part of the project on exploring learners' perceptions of their writing strategies on an intensive EAP course. And the research question that we addressed in our study is as follows, as you can see on the slide. What were the second language learners' perceptions of their own writing strategies at the beginning and at the end of the pre-sessional EAP summer program? So this is this EAP summer program was happening at one of the UK universities, and it's still happening there. But this is the time I conducted it a few years ago, and one of the UK universities. Moving on to the participants, a group of 14 Chinese L2 learners of English were chosen as participants for our study. They were all pre-undergraduate students taking the EAP course. Moving on to the instruments that we used to collect our data, we used two qualitative instruments for data collection. And the first one were interviews, which we conducted with every participant, with each of our 14 participants. There were two interviews. One interview was at the very beginning of the first week on the EAP program, and the other interview was conducted at the very end of the last day, or the day before the last EAP course, when the program has basically finished. Moving on from the interviews, I'd like to talk a bit about second qualitative research method that we've used, research strategy that we used, which is the learning journals or reflective logs. All our participants, all 14 participants, submitted reflective entries, and there were 3 of them submitted by every learner. So one entry upon completion of every weekly assignment. So one of the most interesting and probably the most widely reported by our participants in both interviews and learning journals findings was the increased engagement of most of our participants in extensive reading, again, as perceived by the learners. And you can see one of the quotes from one of the students from the post-course interview that I put on the slide. My major is economics, so I will read more papers or other materials related to my subject. This should help me so much to improve my writing ability. So this was our first major finding. The second finding, which I would like to report on, is the increased reading as well, but this time not of the scholarly literature, but increased reading of other students' work. So students' work that was completed previously on the courses. We were encouraging our students, and we put some of the good examples of students writing on the website every week, and we encouraged them to read other students' work. So the other finding was about revision behaviors, the perceptions of students of their own revisions. What we found is that there was a major change from week 1 to week 4 in terms of decrease of revision for grammatical accuracy, again, as reported by the students. I would also like to report on one last finding of there was one more finding which we have on the backtracking, which is one of the revision strategies. When the students read over again and again for what they have written, we've noticed that they've increased, the use of backtracking has increased over time, over the course of 4 weeks. So many of our students began to read their essays again and again, because there are, as reported by one of the learners, because there are some mistakes concealed. So maybe at first sight we cannot find them, so you should read again and then you should be able to find them. So it aided them in generating their own ideas. And when students reread their essays, they realized that they can reflect on what they have produced, reconsider the clarity of their ideas, help them to express their ideas with better coherence. And this aligns with some of the scholarly findings by Michel and Jones and Silva. The final key finding of our research was seeking tutors' support and increased appreciation of learners, of most of our participants, the vast majority of our participants, of teacher feedback, of both written and oral feedback given by the teachers. From what I've read in the learning journals, and also from the interviews that I had with quite a few of the students, I've noticed that they started to value teachers' suggestions more and more.
First of all, thanks very much indeed, Anna. That was a really interesting presentation, and it's clearly a very interesting and robust study. The one issue that came to mind, one of the things I was wondering about was the extent to which the strategic developments actually created discernible approaches to writing. That is, whether sort of constellations of strategies could actually be sort of had sort of contours to them which could be definable in terms of approaches. And the reason I'm asking is, well, you know, obviously one of the big underlying aims of strategy research is trying to see what actually works, but there is quite a literature now, I would say, on approaches to writing that seem to work. I'm thinking particularly of the work of Torrance et al. I think it's 1994 and 2000, looking at undergraduates and postgraduates. My own research in this area is also relates to this. One of the things I identified in my own research with undergraduates was the emergence of different approaches. One approach was a sort of drafter approach, where people invested time in iterative drafting of whole texts, and the other was a planning approach, in which students invested time in detailed outlining, recursive outlining, and thus their text production actually simply a transference from outline to text. And in my own research, what seemed to matter actually was not whether students did one or the other, but that they did one or the other really seriously. It was the investment of time in serious drafting or serious planning that seemed to have an impact on the ultimate quality of the work.
Yeah, those strategies
you thought about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to, I think I forgot to mention this in the presentation as well, that some of these writing strategies, for example, the strategies of revision and the use of, the extensive reading, we kind of, the teachers not just encouraged them to use, but we taught them, I would say, explicitly on the course, and we encouraged them to use this, and we mentioned we mentioned some literature on it as well, so that they would try to invite them to adopt these strategies in their own writing. And I think this is important. Yeah, we try to teach, to explain what it actually is, what benefit it might have for their writing. And I think being aware of it from the literature as well as from the practice as they were going on week by week. They've noticed changes, and the feedback that they've received in writing and orally as well, where we highlighted those changes, helped them to move forward and to apply those strategies even more. And I think that some of these, have really helped them to develop their writing. I didn't mention today the other part of the study which we talk about, where we've noticed the developmental changes in their syntactic and lexical diversity of their writing. And this is probably a different time for different talk. But we've noticed that there were significant changes quantitatively, changes, especially in their lexical performance as well. So that the use of academic vocabulary, the use of varied vocabulary in their writing, not so much in syntax, but in lexis, we've noticed major changes. And I think this was perhaps, I wouldn't say completely, but partly due to this input which we were giving them on the program, on the strategies. I don't know, is it what Simon meant? Or
absolutely.
Yeah, maybe I just misinterpreted something.
Okay, all right. Richard, I think back over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, there were three broad points I wanted to make. Is one is it's quite nice to see people doing research over a period of time, and I think your suggestion of doing a follow-up study would be quite useful. I do think the way in which people learn to write is a very slow process, and if you like, a lot of our research methods encourage people to look over this over a short period of time. So it would be really good to get a longer term thing. The second point I wanted to make, the second 2 points about the nature of strategies. So at the beginning of your talk, you were sometimes talking about strategies for learning and sometimes strategies for writing.
Right.
I did actually think it was quite interesting that your findings related to both things, whereas I think the fact that your participants were reading more, that seems to be a strategy for how you learn to write, and it's quite interesting that they're conscious of that. And whereas the revisiting text is more a strategy for writing, and it's quite interesting they were doing that. And this is actually rationale for saying that you don't need to divide these strategies; they're just general strategies. The other thing I wanted to think about is, again, one of the issues about strategies is the extent to which they're conscious. And I did think what you said about the grammar thing was very interesting, because, again, my own research does suggest that people do put less attention into grammar as they get more advanced. And I do wonder whether this is actually because they're putting less attention into grammar, or because it's becoming less conscious. And as they become more expert, they don't need to do so much. And it was very interesting when you said that when the quantitative data related to lexis rather than to grammar, so maybe their expansion in vocabulary, which your students didn't mention as a strategy, but clearly their vocabulary is expanding, maybe in an unconscious way. And so that's a interesting gloss on what do we mean by a strategy and what the limits are on strategy. And I think this is a justification for your approach of doing both a qualitative thing, which looks at the conscious elements, but also a quantitative element, which also looks at things which the learners are not conscious of.